listening to Sasquatch Syndicate.
911, what are you reporting?
We got someone or something crawling around out here.
Did you see what it was? Was it a person or an animal or?
I can't tell. All I know is that my sensor light came on and I just happened to glimpse and see this thing running across the yard.
And all the ape believers don't want any of the paranormal believers to say anything because they're all whacked and screwed up and we don't want them. And all the paranormal believers don't want, they're going to the ape believers saying, well, you're all closed-minded. You're not open to the fact that it does this and it does that.
And I look over my left shoulder and this creature is running through the woods and it's bulldozing the brush down. And I knew, man, this thing is going to get me.
Welcome to Sasquatch Syndicate. I'm your host, Chuck, out in Seattle, Washington, along with Paul in Portland, Oregon. Thanks to everyone for listening and those following us at SasquatchSyndicate.com and on our social media outlets. So just a few announcements before we begin this year's holiday special. I know many of you have been asking for some time what's been going on with the show. You guys seem very, very busy traveling, and I know many of you are keeping up on our social media. So, Paul, without further ado, take it away.
Hello, this is Paul, your co-host of Sasquatch Syndicate. These last 3 years have been an amazing journey. Thank you to all of our listeners. We couldn't have done it without you. It's with great honor that we're pleased to announce Sasquatch Syndicate has been acquired by Sherpa Networks. Now, this doesn't mean the search is over. This is simply the next step in an exciting journey that Chuck and I had to take. And while we're not sure where this journey will take us or where it will end, we know you'll always be near. So stay up to date by following SasquatchSyndicate.com and social media. We look forward to continuing this journey with each and every one of you. Happy holidays and happy trails.
to this year's holiday special. With us tonight on Sasquatch Syndicate, we're joined by Bill Sheehan. He is the author of Bigfoot Terror in the Woods. There are multiple volumes, and if you haven't picked those up, I'd highly encourage it. So, Bill, welcome to the show. Happy holidays, and if you wouldn't mind, maybe you could share your background for our listeners and really how you got into the phenomenon.
Sure. Well, I grew up, we moved out to Long Island in the early 60s. And my father took a transfer with the FAA to MacArthur Airport. And at that time, it was slated for some growth. In other words, they knew there was some big developers out here back then, Levitt, Sid Farber, and they were building a lot of developments. And this country out here was pretty much potato fields and farmland at that point in time. And we came out from the city. My father took the job. Now, it's interesting. My father was a pilot, and he had told me so many stories when he was young, living in and around the city. Of course, there weren't really any airlines per se back then. And he used to hang around some of these dirt airfields and help guys work on their engines and planes in exchange for flight instruction. And he told me about barnstorming under the bridges in New York. I mean, you couldn't even think of doing that now. But back then, that was his life. And I grew up around my dad, around airplanes. He was a radio control model enthusiast when really there were very few people doing that. In fact, he had handmade radios. And I grew up around him identifying planes in the air, constellations, planets at night. So I was kind of geared up as an observer as a young person. And I guess sometime in the late 60s, I must have seen the Patterson-Gimlin film. I don't remember. There weren't many channels on TV back then, so I'm not too sure if I saw a clip or if perhaps I saw some still shots in perhaps Life magazine or Look. The world was a different place back then. We weren't inundated with everything that's around us now. And I just remember at that point in time, I said to myself, wow, this thing is real, and it is out there walking around up there in the woods in Washington or Oregon. And I said, this is just amazing, And I grew up eyes wide open. I was different. A little bit different kind of bird than most of my friends. I like sports and everything like that, but I had my eyes in the skies, and in the woods and bird identification and fishing from the days of my youth. So I was a little bit different right from the get-go. And, I mean, that just sparked my interest right there, which would carry on later on in life. I never lost interest in the creature and would do and read and tune into anything and everything I could possibly find or get my hands on to gather more information about it.
So, Bill, Bigfoot Terror in the Woods, a fantastic series. Again, if you haven't picked it up, be sure to pick that up and read it. But were you always a writer, Bill? And really, how did you kind of jump in feet first and get started?
I used to do some magazine articles. That was kind of a strange thing. Somebody had approached me who was involved in the graphic arts business, and she said that she had a boss who was looking for somebody to write some articles about their clients. It wasn't really a magazine per se. I was writing backgrounds of the people who were involved in their company as like a sales pitch for them and who they were and what they could provide for you. And then the same girl, we had gotten together to write. She was an artist, and I told her I had some ideas for some children's stories. I was inspired by the Beatrix Potter series. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, I haven't read that one.
Well, you wouldn't unless you had little children and you bought the box sets. Beatrix Potter was famous for writing Peter Rabbit, and there was a whole series of books that she did about these little animals come to life, so to speak. And I was inspired about the classic look of her books and the like old English style of storytelling, you know. And I had some stories that I had written up, and Laura was doing the illustrations. But just to show you what we were up against back then, you know, my books now I printed on CreateSpace through Amazon. You can self-publish now. Back then, you had to find somebody, an agent, and hope they weren't ripping you off, trying to present what you were putting together to some publishing house. And, you know, let me tell you, it was pretty much mission impossible. I mean, to me, you were throwing your money into a well, and you had no idea what you were getting back for your money, you know. But I wrote that. I wrote a couple of, I have a Christian blog that's called The Prophetic Pundit, and in there I do a lot of blogging about scriptural things and the problems and situations that plague people. So that's another venue for me to write in. And I had a couple of religious books that I had wrote that are also associated with the blog. And then at some point in time, I said to myself, I was a little disgruntled about the lack of data that was available relative to Sasquatch. And I just started taking it upon myself through a variety of ways and means of gathering information relative to sightings and evidential finds and this, that, and the other thing, and started to assemble them in the series of these books that I now have.
So, Bill, looking at, you know, Bigfoot Terror in the Woods, and certainly some fantastic tales and chronicles and eyewitness accounts, you know, over the years. But in terms of how you compiled that information, you know, what has been, you know, your best recipe, and has it been boots on the ground or just a lot of research?
Well, without giving up my recipes, I joke with people all the time because everybody says that to me. How do you get your information? In fact, one lady on Amazon, you know, you're allowed to leave comments on the books. She says to me, or to anybody who's reading, she was, most people, by the way, love the books and say wonderful things. But she says, I'm not buying it. She says, I know how hard it is to get information on Bigfoot. And, you know, where does this guy come off with all of these sightings and evidential encounters? And then she said, he even tells you they're fake in the beginning of his book. But what she failed to see was in my little disclaimer, what I said was, inasmuch as Bigfoot is deemed in the eyes of the world to be fake, therefore everything I'm writing and pretty much everything we discuss is fake in their eyes. Because, you know, people look at us like we're Looney Tunes talking about a creature that they say does not exist. And, but getting back to the other thing, I use some old school methods to gather my information, and I'll just give you a little tip. Small town newspapers can be quite advantageous to locating people if you don't mind spending the money and the time and the effort involved in doing so. You know, I think people think that you just snap your fingers and people come running up to your car window to tell you a story about a Bigfoot or a UFO or an angelic encounter they've had. but I make it my business to speak to people about things that your normal person usually doesn't converse with you about. And in so doing, just doing that, I get a lot of lead-ins to conversations that you ordinarily might not hear about. So I don't know if I really answered your question.
Well, you didn't even really need to, but I appreciate kind of, the basis. That question just kind of rolled off my tongue. And, as I think about it, Bill, it is pretty fascinating to me, that here's someone like yourself with this passion that you're out there, doing eyewitness accounts. You're looking in the archives, intranet, historical information. It's really great to see somebody else promoting the cause and kind of bringing that to the forefront, for others. So really do appreciate your work. The other thing I was just going to share is, you can kind of feel your passion come across as you're putting this information together. It's almost like an investigator or a detective.
To me, the amount of evidence that is already accumulated, if 1% of that was true, it would be enough to hang you or I from the highest yardarm for a crime. And yet, my personal belief is that no matter how much evidence is presented, there will be people that just refuse to believe, like the lady who said, "I'm not buying it." And on the other hand, you have people like myself. I don't need any more evidence. I have never seen a Bigfoot. I am entirely convinced that there are numerous Bigfoot creatures living globally, and a preponderance of them living here in the United States and Canada. So I don't need to be convinced. I'll tell you a funny story. I must have told this a dozen times in the past 6 months. I'm a bird watcher, and I saw my first snowy owl sitting on a street sign at dusk, riding over the Pontoquag Bridge in Hampton Bays last spring. And I just turned 60 years old. So it took me 60 years to spot this owl. And that sighting lasted all of maybe 10 to 15 seconds, if that. Now, I don't know how many snowy owls are around, but it took me 60 years to see one. So I don't, I'm not in the camp of like, well, why don't we see more of them, when it comes to Bigfoot and Sasquatch? First of all, you've got to be looking. And I am looking incessantly for birds, cloud formations, satellites, meteor showers, UFOs. I'm looking all the time. And I'm rewarded for that, or rewarded by doing that on many occasions simply because I'm looking. And I believe these people that are finding and seeing Sasquatches and having encounters, yes, many of them are accidental, totally random. But on the other hand, I think the majority of these people are putting themselves in situations where it now is working to their advantage that they will have an opportunity to see one of these creatures that you or I may not. So that's just my feelings on it, but I have no axe to grind. I totally believe that these people are seeing. And if you think about it, Chuck, what would make a husband and wife sell the home that they love? What would make somebody move to a different location based on something that happened to them, something that scared them so much that they just would not and could not live where they were anymore? That is just, if that doesn't tell you something in and of itself, I don't know what will, but if you're literally scared out of your home, by your experience with a Sasquatch in your orchard, on your property, in the woods, whatever it may be, if that doesn't say something about these encounters, I don't know what does.
Well, and isn't it fascinating, Bill? You know, you could even take, you know, the the standard armchair spectator. You ask them, do you believe in Sasquatch? They say no. You ask them if they believe in the giant panda, and they say yes. And what's so fascinating about that whole topic is that the giant panda was a myth for several hundred years. If you lived in China and you saw a white bear with black eyes, people thought you were nuts. And here you have one of the most unintelligent primates in the world.
Yeah, and they're not exactly speedsters.
Yeah, right. I mean, they don't even breed unless they're in captivity with help, and yet they could avoid detection somehow. You know, yeah, well, that's the tough one, right? I mean, it's just puzzling.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. The creation to me just screams of you have seen nothing yet. I mean, every time Michio Kaku is on, and I love the guy. I love hearing about the physics and the string theory and the black holes. But these people are so full of themselves. They just exude a heavy ego. And, you know, I'm sorry, but you could think whatever you wish. You do not have all of the answers, and you haven't figured everything out. And the rest of the people who aren't PhD status are not exactly the underlings on the planet. You know, there are people out there with reasonable intellect and who know what they're seeing and what's going on. I mean, Chuck, come on. How many times have you heard, oh, it must have been a bear? As if I don't know the difference between a 10-foot-tall primate and a grizzly bear. You know, it's just pathetic. Some of the things they run by us and expect us to just take it like, you know, you have no idea. Like we're a laughingstock.
Well, and I guess you could take it that way if you wish. But, you know, quite honestly, I mean, it doesn't take a scientist to understand that we know Gigantopithecus was a true primate. There's fossil evidence. And is it plausible it could have crossed the land bridge into North America? Absolutely. You know, the University of Alaska at Fairbanks has a research project right there in the Tanana River Valley. And as of late of last year is discovering new fossil evidence of ancestors that crossed the land bridge that we never knew existed. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist or a PhD to put two and two together that if humans could have walked across, these primates could have walked across as well. That is, if you believe it's a primate.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And I'll tell you something very interesting relative to that land bridge. I have a story that was told to me by a Russian professor. And you know how we talk about people hearing Sasquatch having a language. I've heard people describe it like standing at a Chinese restaurant counter when they're shouting out the orders to each other. This Russian immigrant said that when he encountered two Sasquatches in the woods with his landscaper, he had this unusual friendship he developed with his landscaper because he liked his knowledge of botany. And they used to go hiking together. They ran across a pair of Sasquatch in the woods that were ripping some trees down. And they got close enough, but not too close, where they could hear them basically shouting back and forth to each other. And the Russian professor said that to him, it sounded like a Siberian dialect that he was unfamiliar with. I mean, how do you like that? Here is a fluent Russian-speaking gentleman identifying what he heard them speaking as some type of Siberian dialect that he was unfamiliar with. When I heard that, that blew me away. I was like, the first thing that came to my mind was the land bridge across the Bering Sea and, you know, that whole thing.
Right.
But hearing it from him was just like, what? You know, what do you say about that? Is he full of hot air too? I mean, he must have heard something in the intonations and the whatever was going back and forth that said to him, my God, these guys are speaking some type of Russian, some type of, you know, my language, but in a way I don't understand, So I just throw that out there. I thought that was amazing,
No, I think that that's great. And when you were telling that story, I was remembering the story of Zana, and it was this supposed, ape woman of the Caucasus Mountains out there in Russia. And I think Brian Sykes had done some DNA analysis of Zana's descendants. But she was said to have been living in the wilderness naked, but covered in a thick auburn fur and appearing to be a cross between a human and a primate. And so if this creature, these descendants, were there in Russia, potentially they could have picked up some of the, Russian dialects. So it's always interesting. I love all the theoretical connections, so to speak, but it's been fantastic. Hey, Bill, so, here you are, an author, and we always get these questions. Steve Jensen from Williams, Arizona wants to know, Bill, how do you have time to write? Are you retired? And number two, if I could ask, where do you go to write? Do you have your own cabin, or how do you get time to clear your head?
There's a couple of things relative to that. I am a tireless individual. I've had periods in my life where I worked 7 days a week, day and night, and slept when I could. I write early in the morning till it's time for me to take a shower to go to work. I sit down at my computer at midnight and write till 2 o'clock in the morning. And I can get up the next morning at, 7 or 8 and begin again. So I really, thankfully, I have the energy of a freaking 5-year-old. I'm not lacking any resolve to sit down and write.
So, Bill, having said that, do you have any inspirations, or kind of really what's the drive behind it?
And as far as being inspired, I'm very spontaneous. I start to organize thoughts and data in my mind, and then I just kind of get on the keyboard and I let it go. And it's amazing, too, because very rarely do I correct anything that I write. I kind of get zoned in. I'm very focused. And once I get in that mode, it's almost like an internal feed or a mental feed where I just don't want to be disturbed. The passage of time seems like, 2 hours seems like 10 minutes to me. And I just get in there, and pretty much besides editing and proofreading, when I'm done, it's virtually a finished work.
That's really cool. And I've talked to several authors, too, that can do that. And it's because that they have such calm and inner peace with themselves that when they're writing, they're not distracted and, chasing their mind all around on paper. And so when they go back to proof it, it's pretty straightforward and calm. So just real interested on, kind of how you get your head in that space.
I do like to fish. I pray a lot. I do a lot of praying. I do like to be down by the shore. As a matter of fact, tonight I'll be going down by the shore just as a place to just kind of breathe and take in the salt air. And I won't be doing any fishing tonight, but it's just like a release for me. I enjoy being outside. I like to shoot. I'm an archer. So I have ways that I break out of the norm, the typical work environment. And writing to me is a joy. I mean, this is never considered work. Writing to me is a pleasure. I'm grateful to be able to put to paper thoughts and ideas that people find relevant and that people enjoy. Nothing can be greater, Chuck, than to have somebody say, I really enjoy what this guy is doing, bring them back on again as soon as you can. I mean, that is just like, it just warms my heart and makes me laugh, that somebody actually likes what I do, I mean, Chuck, I mean, if you painted a beautiful picture and you had it in a gallery and you were standing in the background as people were passing by and stopping in front of what you've done, and people were saying, wow, I really like this. I wonder if it's for sale. And it's the same thing. It's not being braggadocious. It's just we're doing this in the hope that somebody else will embrace what we're doing. And that's kind of where I'm at with that.
No, and I think that's great, Bill. I mean, your passion for the topic shines and radiates throughout your books, right? I mean, if you pick up Bill's books, you're gonna see that. And the reason people enjoy them is because when you wrote it, it was out of passion. It wasn't a job, right? You were delivering something amazing, and people were embracing it. Very similar to our show. I mean, we're a nonprofit. We've never charged for any of these podcasts. The cool thing is we were nominated for the People's Choice Award for nonprofits, and to us, it's really cool. And it's not braggadocious. It's that when you deliver something that's your passion, people get it. And that's your recipe for success. So, Bill, I hope you don't ever change your writing style. It's absolutely amazing.
Chuck, this is never a grind to me. This is completely and absolutely a passion for me. And when I began this work, I said to myself, I want this to be a conversation. I want people to be able to throw one of these little books down on their coffee table, to pick it up whether you like to read or you don't, to not be intimidated by it, and that you could get in here and you could enter into this world of this individual, read an encounter, read an evidential finding, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, maybe tops. I think the longest encounter I have is the first one in book 1, which is like 10 pages. Most of these encounters you could probably read inside of 5 minutes' time. And then you're left to ponder, do I believe or don't I believe? And thankfully, I think I've accomplished that based on what people are saying, and it's very gratifying. I mean, there's no doubt about it. It's gratifying, and I have more work to do, but I've actually taken a little break. I have my 6th book being proofed right now, and perhaps I'll get back at it over the winter again. But for now, it's going to be volume 6 and a little hiatus from the writing, just temporarily.
So, Bill, take us into the fortress of solitude. Where is it that you write? Do you write on your table? Do you write on your bed? Where do your thoughts come? And paint the emotional word picture for our listeners. Like when Bill Sheehan is out writing.
My wife and I live in an 800 square foot ranch house. We live in a 20 by 40 ranch house on a basement that is about the size of a good apartment. It's just the two of us. I have a little over an acre of land. In my backyard, you'll find my boat, circular blacktop driveway, and I'm backed up against a pine forest. And in the corner, I have about a 3 by 4 foot desk with a small filing cabinet next to it. My PC, my monitor is there, and the phone on which I'm talking to you. And that is my workstation. That is my comfort zone. I have a cushy chair I sit in. I have a music stand next to me that I put my information on. I've got notes, Post-its, legal pads. I am surrounded by data and little stacks and piles of things here and there that only I know what's there. And that's pretty much my environment. So I think that's a pretty good visual for the people out there. I mean, my work area is the typical overcrowded desk with a keyboard placed strategically in the middle of everything.
All right. And of course, I have to know, like, what's your fuel? I'm fueled by Diet Coke on most days, but I'm just curious, when you sit down to write, what's your fuel? What gets you going?
Water and coffee. I don't. I'm kind of. I kicked the sugar thing. So I'm not really drinking anything that's sugary. Pretty much water, coffee, and good food.
All right. Well, I got to know, what is it that you consider to be good food?
My wife is Spanish. She's a great cook. And she was actually a nanny in Italy for many years. She took care of a wealthy Italian family. And let me tell you something. This lady can cook. So good food, good vegetables, plenty of water, and good coffee seem to keep me going.
Nice. If I make it out to New York, I'm definitely coming to your house for dinner. So Bill, real quick, I know that you've prepared a couple excerpts from your books, and there are 6 volumes out there for those that didn't catch that earlier when Bill was talking about it, but definitely pick those up again. Terror in the Woods by Bill Sheehan. But Bill, do you want to share a little bit about some of your short stories and maybe read from some of those excerpts?
Yeah, well, I've selected a couple of shorts for you and for your listening audience. But these accounts, some are historical. One of the accounts I'm going to read for you today is actually a diary account. Others are evidential. In other words, no physical creature was seen, but the evidence that you're left with is overwhelming, in my opinion. And the third one that I've selected for you today is actually just terrifying. I cannot picture myself being in the same circumstances, but nevertheless, if you believe what these two fellas experienced, it'll just rock your world. But all of these encounters, some of them happen in very rural locations. I mean, I'm here in Long Island in New York. There are no Bigfoots in New York and Long Island, by the way. But I have accounts from New Jersey, Pennsylvania, upstate New York, Maine, Arkansas, Louisiana, Florida, both of the Virginias, North Carolina, and then we just keep going Midwest and West. So there is no end to the amount of people out there who have seen these things or experienced them, most of whom do not want to share their name. They would prefer if you didn't tell exactly where they live. Some of the people that I've interviewed, one police officer, he said, I don't even want you to mention what state I was in when I retired. So I kind of honor that. There's a stigma attached to this. Now, I, on the other hand, am the polar opposite of what that police officer requested of me. I talk to everybody and anybody about these things in a way that I don't care what they think. And I don't care what they have to say about me when I leave the room. I find that in speaking to these people openly and honestly, in many cases, I get an open and honest answer in return. So that's just another little interview tidbit that I apply to my own workings, with whether it's with Bigfoot or fishing or anything else. I feel if you share, people will share with you. So That's a little feather in the cap for anybody who's listening out there. Sharing is caring.
All right, and with that, we're going to take a short break. You're listening to Sasquatch Syndicate with Bill Sheehan on our holiday special 2018. All right, well, welcome back to Sasquatch Syndicate's Holiday Special 2018 with Bill Sheehan. And in addition to the Christmas music, we're going to attempt, I guess, are we really going to read Sasquatch Terror listening to Christmas music? Okay, I guess we are. Okay, so anyways, let's just get on with it. We're having some fun. I hope you are too. Merry Christmas. And Bill, take it away.
This to me, perhaps one of the most chilling evidentiary finds. Although I say that up front, and yet when I go back and review encounters, there's so many of them. But let me begin. I call this one the Vancouver Evidence, and the reason why will become evident as we go along here. This is an evidentiary story which was passed down from an uncle to his nephew. And from here on out, you'll be hearing Reggie LaCar's testimony of what he and his coworker experienced. And so let me begin. I was born and raised in the Vancouver area. In college, I had achieved a degree in electrical engineering and found myself working for a startup company in Spokane, Washington. While there, I made friends with a coworker, Clifford Wells from Pennsylvania. He, too, was an engineer. During one of our many dinners together, and after indulging in a brew or two, we overheard some characters at the bar shouting and laughing with each other about Bigfoot. At some point, I asked Cliffy what he thought about the beast. And after Cliffy tried to make some lofty and skeptical comments, I reached into my wallet and pulled out a picture. It was the famous Patty picture, and I passed it to Cliff. He commented that he had seen it before, and he knew that it was a still from a Cowboys film clip, which had supposedly been taken in the woods back in the 50s. I told him that my uncle had given this to me when I was young, and that it had come with a warning. The warning was to always carry more gun than you think you need when you go into the woods. And I carry the picture as a reminder of that warning. I began to share my uncle's story with Cliff, that he and his logging crew were actually run off a job by these things many years ago up in the Canadian woods. Cliff interrupted to ask me if my uncle was still alive, and then asked me if it was possible to visit him, stating that he would really like to talk to him about the experience and hear the story firsthand. During a little summer vacation around the 4th of July, he and I went to visit my Uncle Frank. We found ourselves sitting in his modest home chatting about what I had said to Cliff and the picture I had shown him. At some point, Uncle Frank made a once-in-a-lifetime offer. Hey, listen, fellas, if you'd like, we can go up to the old logging site where I can show you some really weird stuff. Who doesn't like to see weird stuff? We certainly wouldn't turn down the opportunity, so we took off in his truck the next day. It's actually quite funny because my uncle never invited me to see anything before. Having a friend with me must have been my golden ticket. We drove for about 90 minutes until we reached a break in the woods where Uncle Frank turned off the road and onto a low mountainside, where I thought the suspension was going to fall out from under us. Eventually, the trail was so rutted it became impassable, but thankfully, we weren't too far from the final destination, so we got out and walked. Now, Uncle Frank was 76 years old, but he was still in good enough shape that he could challenge a bear to an arm wrestling match and probably win. The mile-long hike up the rest of the mountain was nothing for him. Eventually, we reached a flat-top area that he called either a stage or a landing, though I really don't remember which it was. He told us that many jobs had involved clearing out hillsides where severe windstorms had downed a lot of trees. These locations were what they called windfall. First, they would create a flat work area above where the trees were that needed to be taken, and from there, they would place a type of machine with a big boom on it from which a thick cable would be run down to the base of the hillside by the crew. The cable would be secured to the top of a large tree at the bottom of the hill, creating somewhat of a cable tightrope from the bottom to the top of the work area. The men would work down the hill, trimming up the trees that were knocked down and cutting down the trees which still remained standing. Once downed, they would wrap a cable around the trees in bunches, and with this cable being attached to a hoist or a trolley, which was suspended from the overhead cable. The overhead trolley would then pull the trees back up to the hill to the staging area. As we looked the area over, the place was a mess. It looked like a large bomb had gone off, leveling everything. Though there was quite a bit of new growth that had crept up over the years, the evidence of the work that these men had performed was still more than evident. And now we're getting into Uncle Frank. After a moment, my uncle said, "If you can navigate your way down over in that direction, you will come across some old oil and fuel drums. Take a good look at them, and when you come back, we will have a talk about what you have seen. Go slow, watch your step, so that you don't sprain an ankle or worse." When they cleared an area, they really didn't clear it at all. They took the money lumber and left everything else behind in a junk heap. And walking through that heap was like walking through and over a plate of spaghetti, only the spaghetti was made of tree branches, brush, and debris. Finally, we reached the drums. They were old, rusty, and crushed, but they all still seemed to be sealed and relatively full, with the exception of a couple instances where the welds on the drums had rusted out. Most of the other drums were still fully intact, but the tops and the bottoms of each and every drum were bulging outward, as though some sort of pressure from within had forced them out. But that wasn't the weirdest thing. Each of the drums was cinched or squeezed around in the middle, forming them into an enormous hourglass shape. Upon closer inspection, there was no indication to our eyes of a chain or a rope having been wrapped around them and cinched tight to force the shape. There were no visible scratches or grooves in the metal, and many of them had a good amount of paint still on them. These were industrial 50-gallon steel drums, and you could still smell diesel, gasoline, and oil in the area all around them. If he hadn't told us where to go, I don't believe that anyone else could have found them. Many were wedged in piles of branches and debris. We climbed back up to this landing area, and what an ordeal that was. Coming down was one thing, but getting back up was quite another, and the crew had to deal with that mess every single day. These men must have been animals. When we reached the top, completely winded from the climb, Uncle Frank laughed at us. The two of you guys are wimps. So tell me, what did you see down there? I want to hear all about it. We described the drums to him just like we described them to you, and then he told us to take a seat. He told us that he and his crew of 7 men had come to the site in the usual way. They had everything set to begin work and had begun to go about their business. The 50-gallon drums were kept on the staging area. They contained lubricant, grease, diesel, and gasoline, everything that the machinery needed to operate. It was a large tract of timber, and they knew they would be there for quite a while to clear it all out. When they arrived back to the job site on the morning of the second day, they saw that there had been some damage done to the equipment overnight. Odd things were broken, smashed, or twisted, similar to the destruction that would have been done or left by vandals. They couldn't even begin the workday until many of the things were fixed, and they had to go back into town to get the tools and parts required for the repairs. It had only been one day, and they were already losing money. After the second day, on the third day, the same thing happened. They came back to the site in the morning only to find that much of the equipment had been damaged again. In fact, some of the same things they had just fixed were broken in the same way as before. The owner, who was also a worker, was furious. He was cursing wildly and accusing an industry rival of sabotaging the job site. If the other guy had been there, be he guilty or not, there would have been bloodshed for sure. Now knowing that they might be dealing with vandals, the boss decided to put an armed guard at the site. He approached 2 characters from a local gin mill, offering them $50 a night to stay at the site with their rifles until the morning. This went on for about a week, and every night they built a big fire and sat there until the morning. After the guards had been posted, nothing happened. We had worked with no interruption for the entire week, so the boss got tired of shelling out $50 a day and told them they wouldn't be needed anymore. He figured that whoever had been doing the damage would not waste their time coming to the site anymore, knowing that there were guards waiting there. The very next day, no fire had been made overnight. There were no armed guards watching the site. We arrived in the morning. All of the supply drums were gone. In a rage, the boss left the site and returned with 4 more drums, and that night he decided to stay there himself. This time, he wasn't going to light a fire. He was going to sit quietly in the cab of the crane with his shotgun, and whoever showed up was going to get a belly full of lead. Well, the next morning when the crew arrived, the boss was nowhere to be found. The door was torn open on the cab, and the handle had been ripped off. We searched for him for hours and hours, shouting his name through the woods, working our way up and down the hill, scouring every square inch as best as we could. The only thing that we found was his 12 gauge, which was about 100 feet from the cab, and it was bent in half like something from a Superman episode. Worried, one of the guys went back down to get the police. The next 2 days were spent assisting a massive search, but they never found his body. Only his hat and the drums that had been brought to the job site that day were located. The search team found them in the same area as the 5 from the previous day's disappearance, right where they lie today, squeezed around the middle and thrown clear down the hill. Something had picked up these several 100-pound drums, crushed them around the middle, and hurled them 80 feet away. No human being or beings could have done such a thing. To this very day, the boss is still listed as a missing person, and something was not happy about a lumber crew invading their neighborhood, That's for damn sure. What do you think of that?
Well, wouldn't you imagine, and certainly, that, the generation of loggers and blue collar workers, especially up here in Washington State, I mean, these are, brawny men. They're not one to get scared out of the forest. They live there day after day. And so for them to tell that story and recount it in such detail and issue those types of warnings, something obviously had to happen pretty profound.
This man, an old bear of a lumberjack, when we talk about what type of evidence is needed or not needed, and the fact that he had passed this cutout photograph from the Patty film to his nephew with the explanation of always carry more gun into the woods than you think you're going to need. When we talk about evidence being brought forth and there being believers and non-believers, this guy had no doubt in his mind as to who crushed the drums and threw them down the hillside, who bent the shotgun in half, who ripped the door off the side of the boom truck. I mean, if it was a human being who was just ticked off at the other owner like he thought it was a rival, he would have just come up and whacked him in the head with a bat or maybe even shot him where he sat and then took off, But no, the evidence screams of something other than that. I'm sure you would agree.
Yeah, absolutely. And, back then, your reputation was everything. And so, again, for these, woodsmen, let's call them, right? Real men that spent time out in the forest day after day to recount such tales and issue warnings, through generations. It's very compelling.
Yeah, and things are way different today, Chuck. I mean, I don't have to keep saying that, but I just can't get over it. I remember when we moved into our neighborhood in the 60s, we were the first house being built out of 100. I used to watch the carpenters in the neighborhood. A lot of them were older men, even back then. I'm talking guys that were probably my age back then, and they were still carpenters. Nails, 10-penny and 8-penny nails were being delivered to the job sites in 100-pound kegs. A keg of nails. It was like a wooden, it looked like a beer keg. And these guys would pick those suckers up and schlep them around like they were nothing. But when you start talking about something that has the ability to cinch and hurl a 50-gallon drum filled with fluid, what do you even say about that? That is off the charts, no matter how you look at it. And his Uncle Frank had told them, I want you to go look at this stuff carefully, and then when you're done, tell me what you see, and then we're going to talk about it. He didn't even put any thoughts into their mind as to what you can expect, what you're going to see. Just go down there and look carefully, and then come back and we'll have a little discussion. And they surmised the same things basically that he had, that there was no indication that anything had been wrapped around it or they had been dragged or crushed with a come along and then rolled down the hill. It was impossible to roll anything down this hill. He just said it was like a plate of spaghetti, only the spaghetti was trees and branches. You're not going to roll one drum, let alone, 6 or 8 of them 80 feet into the mist. There was nowhere to roll. They had to have been thrown. Very bizarre.
Yeah, and while you were talking about that, I was thinking about, the Jerry Cruz story about, them coming up to the forest site, and not only did they see the tracks, but a giant tire for a carryall, one of those big earth movers up on the mountains, and these tires weighed over 250 pounds. But it had either been carried or part rolled a quarter of a mile down the road and hurled into a ravine. So when I hear stories like that, it just brings me back to, again, what's out there with that kind of strength.
amazing. I never heard that before, but the strength, I'll tell you something funny. And I was watching a National Geo documentary or something one day. There was a group of chimpanzees that were going to war with another group of chimpanzees. I didn't even know such a thing was possible. But on this show, they said they had these cameras set up, and they were getting all worked up and riled up, and then this group of chimps took off into the forest. When the cameras recorded them coming back, one chimpanzee was holding another chimpanzee that was dead, dragging it next to it back to their, little camp or home, whatever you want to call it. Now, this chimpanzee that was dead had obviously been killed in the fight. And this chimpanzee was holding this other chimp that was equal to itself in size with one hand and just walking along like it was holding a purse. And that was just a chimp. Now, I'm not one that believes that Bigfoot are related to chimps or gorillas, but the ridiculous amount of strength that these creatures must possess is such as we're just totally not familiar with. We can't understand it. It's not to be understood. It's just.
Yeah, the strength would be unimaginable. And even if you believed, it was a Gigantopithecus, right? Looking at the size of that creature next to the modern day mountain gorilla, and you start modeling up the strength comparison, it's absolutely astonishing.
Yeah, I had a couple in Maine, had a cabin for a week. They were canoeing on a lake. Beautiful. The story is actually called the Cathodin incident, Lake Cathodin. And they went out for a morning paddle. Beautiful, pristine lake, like a mirror. They were coming around a bend and saw a cow moose standing in very shallow water, reaching down and eating some vegetation on the side of the lake. As they were sitting there watching this thing for about 20 minutes or a half an hour, the husband spies out something coming through the weeds behind the moose. He points it out to his wife. Now they're watching the moose and watching this darkness coming through the grass. It seemed to be something crawling along up behind this moose. Well, this thing launches out of the grass in like a leaping airborne assault on this female moose, grabs it around the head and neck, drives its head down into the lake bottom like in a suffocating, neck-breaking movement all in one shot, sees them in the canoe, hangs on to the moose. The moose is now dead. They paddle out into the deep water because they were only in like 2 feet of water watching this thing. The Bigfoot took the moose. I have no idea what this moose weighed. 800, 900, 1,200 pounds. It was like a horse. Took the moose by the head and walked away with it out of the lake into the woods. That was their encounter. I mean, just think about just grabbing a moose and, pulling it away with you. I mean, just...
Well, it's nuts, Bill. I mean, who can imagine that kind of strength? And it makes me question, what am I doing traipsing around out there by myself at night? You hear some of these stories and it's just insane.
Yeah, it's just, it just can't be done. I mean, if you ask somebody about that, no, it's impossible. Nothing could do something like that, But I beg to differ, I think they have inestimable strength and abilities that just other animals don't have because of their size and their stature. Just incredible.
So, Bill, now that you've written these books, mostly based on encounters, is that kind of where you want to stay within the genre? Are you thinking about doing some research writing or, some of the theoretical on, based on your experiences? Where do you want to take it from here?
No, I like the encounters, and I think we have first of all, I believe that everybody has their niche. My reading style, my writing style, I like intellectual articles. I like Air and Space magazine, astronomy. I like local history. There was a guy who used to write a series of articles about New England's lighthouses, ocean rescues, Revolutionary War, history around the tri-state area. I like a lot of different, I kind of beat to a different drum myself as far as what I really like to read and what I find interesting. And I like the fact that we can kind of get in and out of these encounters and the evidence, and then we're left to ponder it, to sit back and just say, wow, that was exceptional. That was unbelievable. I mean, you could pick the words you want to pick, but for me, this is my niche. Now, somebody had heard one of my angel stories, which are personal to me, and a bunch of people had commented that, you should write some books on angels and this and that. But, you really have to pick what it is you want to do and kind of stay focused on that, because otherwise you start spreading yourself too thin, Now, for me, that may change in the future, but I was never one, although I've studied medicine and I know what it is to slog through anatomy and physiology and kinesiology and pathology and the books that are big enough to freaking choke a Bigfoot. And but in my private time, I have more of an appreciation for short stories, well-written articles, and this is kind of why I guess I got involved in this. I kind of lend my own feelings to writing these books, thinking about somebody who may not want to get in. For instance, I have Sanderson's book, The Abominable Snowman Come to Life. Great book, but it's like reading an encyclopedia. So, I understand how people pick that book up and go like, oh, my God, and at times it seems like he was scratching for more words to fill up another 20 pages, and then you get into some meatier portions of the books where some things were being found and footprints were being located and the like. And, I found the book to be a bit of an overkill, was in regards to having too much type in it, and which is good. I mean, it's good for some people. There are people out there that, crave this type of material, but I'm just not one of them, If it was a real field of study for me, then really I would have no choice. I would have to dig into everything and anything that was put forth about it to make my case. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm happy. I'm more than content just to put to paper the evidence and the testimonials that are being brought forth. I mean, to me, it's a joy, and I feel like I'm doing a service. I don't know what your thoughts are about that.
Well, and you're connecting people to the phenomenon through storytelling and, anecdotal at best, right? Because they are just stories. But at the same time, you got to consider the context of which they were written or derived. And I think if, it attaches more people to the phenomenon and more people get interested in the scientific or theoretical, it's all good. So, Bill, we got a couple questions that came in on social media. First, from Darren Wake out of San Jose, California. First, he says, Bill, Merry Christmas. He wanted to ask you, in your spare time, what do you do on your vacations? Do you have any trips planned? And he also wanted to say you sound like the David Attenborough of Sasquatch. I guess that's a compliment. David does a lot of voice narrations over nature videos. So pretty cool.
Well, I'm going to share something with you. I don't fly. Even though my father was a pilot, I said to my father when I was young, I said, Dad, I don't like flying. And I said, that doesn't mean I wouldn't like to fly myself. I said to him, I could visualize myself living out in Iowa, flying a Piper Cub or something with a little joystick in the middle of the cabin, knowing that if the engine crapped out on me, I could set it down in a cornfield and perhaps survive. But in this day and age, the flight game does not entice me. So I'm pretty much a landlubber around my area here. And to be honest with you, my real passion in life is fishing, striped bass fishing in particular. And until I really can have my fill of that, I really have no desire to go anywhere or really do much of anything, to be honest with you. It may sound funny, to some people, but that's my passion. And until I can really get my fill of that, I'm not like a world traveler, although some people may think that. I'm more of somebody who likes to sit home and read or enjoy the company of my wife, go down to the shore, which, like I said to you, I'm doing tonight, writing. I shoot, trap, and skeet. And so, it's that in itself is fulfilling for me,
Yeah, and I think it's cool that you can stay within yourself there and just enjoy, fishing and getting your fill, like you said, of, striped bass fishing. It's pretty awesome. All right, Bill, we've got another social media question here from Ryan Stevens of Vancouver, Washington, and he writes, Bill, happy holidays. I was just curious, your biography says you are a marksman. What are you a marksman of, and do you hunt in tree stands, on the ground? What's your preferred method of hunting?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I do not hunt at all. I shoot archery via targets, and my shooting is that of clay shooting in the form of skeet and trap. So I'm not a hunter per se. Now, I could hunt here on Long Island. There is some seasonal hunting of deer. There is an archery season and a shotgun season, but I just choose not to. I'm more of a marksman in the purest sense of the form, be it target shooting. So that's just me personally.
All right, we got a Jennifer Jackson from Biloxi, Mississippi, and she writes, Bill, Merry Christmas. Just a quick question as an author. If you were reading yourself, do you prefer hardback, softback, or electronic?
I just like paper. I like the feeling of paper in my hand, whether it's soft cover or hard cover. There's a local library not too far from us where you can go in there and they have like a 50-cent book rack. I guess they clear the shelves out periodically. The 50 cents for a hardcover, I think it's 25 for a paperback. And you can find some real interesting things on that rack, when you go in there, if you don't mind buying used books,
Another question here from Diane Langdon in Sacramento, California. She writes, Bill, who does your cover art for your books?
The cover art is done by a wonderful lady named Casey Smith. And if you look on the interior cover of any of my books, her name and website is in there. It's Sugar Studios. Sugar Studios. She's a real sweetie. She's the wife of a nurse that I work with, and expert of experts on design and all things graphic arts related. In fact, her mainstay is what is called branding. In other words, if you have a business and you want to get noticed, She leads you down the path of how to begin to set yourself up in a way that makes you look professional, be it in the form of website labeling, package design, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, to put you in a position where you then become a brand, not just a guy starting a business in an industrial plaza in your town, But she is excellent. Casey Smith.
All right, next question, Daniel Rodriguez. He's from Providence, Rhode Island, and he asks, Bill, do you ever do any book signings? And if I wanted to have one of my books signed, can I send it to you?
Boy, oh boy. I'll tell you what, if he wanted to send me a copy, if he emailed me, I don't really distribute any of the books. I do have some books in my possession that I send out to people, looking to get some airtime or to promote what it is I'm doing. But I don't per se sell anything, from my home. All of the sales are done on Amazon. But, I mean, if somebody wanted to send me a copy, if they emailed me and wanted to send me their copy, I would be happy to autograph it and send it back to them. I'd be thrilled to do so.
And to anybody out there listening that wants Bill to sign their book, and if you pick up a copy, just go to SasquatchSyndicate.com, hit contact us, and I'll have the staff reply on best how to get your information out to Bill. Okay, Bill, and one last one here from social media from Jenny Yahamanson from Munising, Michigan. And she writes, Bill, I just wanted to let you know I really enjoy your books, and I read them to my 4 boys in front of the fireplace before bed. I just thought you'd like to know.
Yeah, now, here's the funny thing. Chapter 1, Book 1, the Michigan Upper Peninsula encounter, happened in her backyard. They were in Algiers County. Tell her I'm sorry if she hears me and I'm mispronouncing it or have my towns or counties misconstrued. But I know they were in Munising, I think it's pronounced Munising, Munising, Michigan.
Yeah, that's exactly where this lady's from. That's awesome.
Algiers County, where these guys had an encounter for the record books. That's actually the longest encounter in any of my books. I came right out of the gate with that one in Volume 1. And it's a long encounter, so I won't open up the door for it or to it on the phone with you. It would take me 10 minutes. I'd be better off reading it. But what happened to them up in the woods up there was just incredible. And these two guys had met in boot camp in North Carolina, carried on a friendship later in life, and the one fellow who was up there he was Finnish. And when I say Finnish, I mean from Finland, his family. And he had invited him over there. The door was always open, and they went, and he was going to take him out hunting and fishing. And what they got was a little more than they bargained for in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So you definitely want to check that story out. It'll just blow your mind.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right. Well, Bill, this has been a fantastic hour and a half. I can't thank you enough for coming on Sasquatch Syndicate and appearing on our Holiday Special 2018. We really do appreciate it. I know our listeners do as well. And we wish you a safe and happy holiday season.
Yeah, I'd like to wish everybody a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I'm thankful for the work that you're doing as a nonprofit, and I'm thankful to all the listeners for throwing their hat into the ring with Sasquatch and Bigfoot on an ongoing basis. I really think people would enjoy the books. I wrote them to be enjoyed, so I'm hoping you'll all go out there and give them a shot. I put my heart and soul into these, so inevitably that's what I do it for, right? I want somebody to read it and tell me how much they love reading it. And Chuck, I'd like to thank you and your staff for everything you're doing, and wishing you all the merriest of Christmases, and the happiest of New Year's in 2019.
All right. Hey, Bill, thanks again, and we'll look forward to seeing you out there in New York.
Sounds good. Anytime, Chuck, anytime.
This concludes our December 2018 holiday special. Sasquatch Syndicate will return as soon as we can. Thanks to all of our listeners and those that have been out to our website and those following us on social media. Sasquatch is a controversial subject. So for all the believers and disbelievers, and those that will tell you they have all the answers, just remember, we're flying through space at 700 miles per hour. Buckle up.